Hi, and welcome to another exclusive Captain Disillusion related tutorial in our series that seems to focus on minute details and tricks of the trade that don't get discussed in other tutorials out there. Last time I talked to you about how to light a green screen on set, the nuances that go into that. So I thought it's only natural to follow up with the post-production side of things and actually do a green screen shot. So I've got myself some sample shots. I've got a foreground. I'm just going to make it into a comp and dive right in. What this is an outtake from the anamorphic bin episode, and I'm just holding my cat Sonia and posing with her. That's the green screen and the lighting that I was using for my previous tutorial. It should be perfect. Everything should work great. So let's try that. Let's try to replace this green screen. I'm going to assume that you have done this at least to some extent before, whether in Final Cut or Premiere or After Effects. So you might know that in the case of After Effects, we would highlight our footage, go to Effect, Keying, and choose usually Key Light, which is the most advanced keying plugin that comes with After Effects. So let's choose Key Light, and let's choose the screen color picker and click on somewhere on the green screen close to the foreground subject to pick that color. And it replaces the green and we're done. No, of course not. This might look okay at first glance, but if we turn on the transparency grid, we see a whole bunch of problems. Most of Sonia is like a ghost and partially transparent, and both of our beautiful green eyes are kind of transparent now. So there's a whole lot of problems. The transparency grid definitely lets you see that. Another great way to look at it is switch this view from the final result of what is being keyed to the combined matte, which is just the black and white alpha channel, basically representing everything that is supposed to be transparent as black, everything that's opaque as white, and everything in between as some shade of gray. So here we've got all this print through, all of this transparent stuff. Neither of us is made of any transparent or translucent materials. We should just be a perfectly solid white silhouette. So this helps us see a lot. But you know what? We might not be seeing all the detail. For that, we just to judge all the edges and color issues throughout the process, we're going to need to create our own custom background. So let's make a solid, Command Y. And a lot of people like to just make this some bright color that would be very different from the background, which works. But I'm super methodical about it. I like to pick the background color itself. Then, once I have the solid, go to Effect, Channel, Invert, and that way I get the exact opposite, the negative image, the opposite color on the color wheel, which is as far as you can get from that green. So it should really stand out. And while I'm at it, I can add a couple of utility effects, such as tint, in case I want to turn this into a monochrome version, which is also good to check, how your color spills and the edges are looking. And also I'll add levels so that I can change this, make this darker or brighter as I go, because this is also good to check how your foreground holds up against different brightnesses of background. But let me just turn these off for now and put it in the back, turn on my key, and I'm glad I did this because now we can see a whole bunch of problems here that we didn't see with the other views. Our background's actually not that transparent. It's got all that noise because this shot is a bit underexposed, and so there is all that stuff we have to fix. So there's a few ways we can hack that. We can increase the screen gain here, which isn't actually meant, as I understand, to do this, but it does help in this case. It's actually meant for when you're trying to make your background not fully transparent. Like if your shot is full of haze, or this is supposed to be like a tinted window, this is what you would use. But we can sort of use it. Let's raise it like 2% above 100, and that really helps to cut down on the noise. The screen balance isn't controlling our matte very much. It's more of a how much color correction is introduced into the picture. Because Key Light doesn't just identify your screen color and make that transparent or partially transparent, it also kind of analyzes the presence of that color in your overall picture and kind of pulls it out of it. If we crank this way up, we see that our image is just completely becomes devoid of any green channel information, and it even kind of spreads into colors that are next to green in the color spectrum. And this just looks crazy, like some sort of old-timey magazine printing that's been baked in the sun. It does affect the matte, because if we go here into the combined matte, as we play around with this screen balance, you see it makes like more holes or less holes, and usually it's going to give you the most kind of opaque result by just taking it all the way down. And that would be great, except it does affect our key, because if we don't have any of this screen balance at all, you see the edges, you start to see all that green spill. This looks like old school, crappy chroma key, and we can't have that. So as we add it in, this is actually a good way to do it. You want to take it all the way down to see what the problem is, and then bring it up just enough where that gets neutralized, but not so much that it starts to completely change the colors of your whole picture. So we do need this up a little bit. So what's left for us, these dispill and alpha bias, these are advanced things that, like if your shot has a lot of color problems and it's just not, the green screen's not looking very green, you use that for that. It's not going to help us in this case. So we're going to go down to the screen matte tools, which these set of settings is what you actually use to correct these problems we've been talking about for too long now. So clipping the white will clip away all that transparency in the white parts. Similarly, clipping black will start to clip away all these stray opaque portions in what's supposed to be transparent. So we're going to play with these values. Let's go into the matte again, and really we can crank this clip white all the way down till even fairly green parts like her eyes become completely opaque. And now we have a nice solid opaque foreground matte, and we're done, right? Let's go to the final result. Well, not exactly, because of course all this pushing and pulling has really encroached on our edges, and now this looks horrible. So what do we do now? We're left with all these other values we can play around with and try to refine our edges. And this is where you typically end up. This is where I've always ended up. And this is the heart of my tutorial. I guess the whole point I'm doing this particular video is, what do you do now? You go in and you crank this some more to get rid of that noise. You crank this back and forth to make sure the edge looks its best. Maybe you need to shrink in on that, a little bit of that, that border stuff. And maybe you need to soften things a bit. Let's look at other parts of the image. Maybe on this sharp edge, we could see that there's a whole kind of border happening. So maybe we need to shrink some more and make that look natural. And, we can play around. And where we end up is something that kind of looks okay. I mean, this looks better than some 1980s switcher color key effect, but it's not exactly like, it's not going to hold up for like a Hollywood movie. And the thing is, it's also a very unstable result. Like, you could get this to look decent, but if I lean over and the lighting is slightly different, or in another take of this shot, the aperture of the camera was just tweaked a tiny bit, this has the potential to completely fall apart and things will look bad again, and you have to like reconfigure every value to arrive at that magic place where everything is just barely in balance. This isn't a good way to do this process. So let's re-examine what's happening and what we've done. I'm going to reset this, and I'm going to pick the screen color again. What we have to think about is, yes, we have all these issues, all these problems here. And yes, we have all these problems here. But besides that, the actual edges that Keylight gives us by default are awesome. They look great. This is the one thing it's trying to do for us right off the bat and make it look good. So we should take advantage of that. I mean, this looks so good with nothing adjusted that maybe we need to address these big issues through a separate process. So that's what we really want to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crank the clip black way down so that I know there's no opaque pixels here at all. And I'm going to switch to my screen combined matte and clip this all the way down till I know this is completely opaque. And yes, we've destroyed our edges, but we're going to shrink them by a lot. We're just going to get rid of our edges. We're going to go way in so that we're basically inside of the real edges of our foreground subjects. And we're going to set this aside. Then we're going to apply another key light effect and kind of pretend we're starting from scratch. I'm going to pick the screen color once again, and I'm going to go into my screen combined matte view. I'm going to see all the same problems, but now we have a weapon, a secret weapon to deal with that, because the key light effect has an inside mask and outside mask tool. And you would do outside masks sometimes if you have like real problems on the edges, or maybe your screen has like markers on it or things you just have to get rid of. They're not going to go away through keying. You could make a mask, an actual, mask on the image, and say, this is my outside mask, so anything outside of it, cut away. And similarly, you could do an inside mask, so you could get rid of all this stuff through like tracing and creating like an interior shape and saying anything inside this shape should be opaque. And then you would designate those masks here, and that would work. But of course, this is such a complicated shape and the holes are so close to the edge that it would be impractical. This would just require us to rotoscope the entire shot, which is like, why are we even doing green screen then? But we have created this inside mask by this process. So now instead of making an actual mask in this inside mask tool, we're just going to say for the source alpha section, we're going to say add to inside mask. Oh, and we have to turn on our actual effect, and we have to set it from combined matte to intermediate result. That's just how it works. Intermediate result, let's see. The intermediate result is like the untouched version of our footage with that matte that we created applied to it. And now we're adding that on top of this normal key light effect, which if I switch it to normal, to final result, everything inside of us is completely opaque. And you could see that in the combined matte. It's basically like our little shaky, semi-transparent matte that is created by this second effect, and then our perfectly solid interior matte that's like a safety thing. Once it goes beyond a certain amount through the edge, it's opaque. So now we can go back into that first one and, maybe unshrink it. We can control how far in this happens, and we can soften it to create that like a smoother transition. And now in our second key light effect, we're free to just tweak the screen matte values to just get the result that we want. So we only have to tweak this a little bit, and we only have to tweak the clip white a little bit to make sure those edges are not like semi-transparent. And we can play around with the values again. But as you can see, with just a tiny bit of few tweaks, we end up with a much better key. So I think maybe I will clip black some more, and maybe I will shrink it a bit. But we've basically got something that is holding up whether our background is bright or dark. It's a pretty decent key, and what's great is it's just a clip with a couple of effects applied to it. Everything is self-contained. So that's a plus. But there are a couple of minuses. The first minus is that we no longer have that refined color correction control that key light gives us. You see, the screen balance setting doesn't do anything. It doesn't affect my image even if I crank it to 100%, because we're here on looking at the intermediate result, and intermediate result just doesn't take into account that color balance. And maybe that's what we want. I mean, we certainly want to keep our green eyes looking green, but if I switch my temporary background to like a neutral background, we can see that in this particular shot, there's a problem because all this chrome is like bouncing pretty green looking light from the green screen, and there's nothing we could do about that. This green screen could be like a mile away and it will still have this reflection, because that's just how reflections work. So we need to fix that, but now we just don't have the luxury of fixing that. That's problem number one. Problem number two is you might still need an outside mask, a garbage mat. And if you try to apply one, in fact, I think we do need a garbage mask for this, because even though our green screen admittedly is lit completely flawlessly, if we move it over like this, you see there's like a defect in the image that just happens to be how this sensor captures. It creates this row of desaturated pixels, and we have to get rid of that. Like if we did want to have the shot positioned this way, this would just be there, and we need to get rid of it. So let's say we wanted to do an outside mask. So I'm gonna choose like the ellipse tool and just select something. As you can see, it's doing a weird thing. It's not really doing the ellipse, it's doing like a bounding box around the shape that you make. Maybe in 90% of garbage mask situations, this would be fine, because yeah, I can get rid of this line and then I can encompass everything else and it should be okay. But what if it's not okay? What if this green screen had like a bunch of motion tracking markers, right? And I needed, let me simulate that by kind of pre-composing this, and then I'll go in here into the original shot and I'll just create a fake, let's say like, I'll just make a solid of some bright color, and let's say that this little red square was actually on the green screen as a marker, right? And it happened to be right here next to Sonia's head. Let's go back out. This is what it would look like. You could never, key this out. You have to cut it out. So if I want to, like we have my hand here and everything, I'm going to take a piece of this mask and then try to cut this out. Well, see, it doesn't work, because the bounding box, as long as there's a piece of the shape here and here, it's just going to include all this. And so it no longer works. This is a big problem. This is due to the interaction of these two effects, which give us that cool setup, but they're creating this glitch, and they're not letting us do the color correction on the cheeks. So there is yet another way to set this up that's a little more flexible. Let me get rid of this mask, and in fact, let me just undo to where this wasn't a pre-comp. Instead of having this one clip contain these two stacked effects, we're going to have two clips with one effect each. So we'll duplicate this, and in the top clip we will leave the top effect, in the bottom clip we will leave the bottom effect, and in the top effect we will switch it back to final result, and in the bottom effect we will disable that inside mask setting that we had set. We'll put it back to normal. Now we have accomplished the same thing with two different clips physically, literally stacked on top of each other. Now this foreground thing is laying on top of the background, but it's the same image, so it all comes together. But the great thing is, we now can mess with the colors on this picture, and we can desaturate the green out of it. And if we take it to 0, we can see that green spill, a little bit of it, just a tiny bit. So we can raise it just a bit to neutralize it. Great, we've done that. That has really done a number on our eyes. So, this particular situation requires a little bit of a manual touch, but you're not always going to have like green stuff in your foreground object on green screen. This is just one of those rare situations, so we have to address this. But it's not as scary as it seems. I'm just going to make another duplicate of this clip. I'm going to set this one back to intermediate results so that it brings back all of our colors. But we're going to limit those colors to just the areas where the eyes are. So I'm going to make a little oval mask, make Sonia into like a raccoon. I'll just encompass the eye area, and I'm going to give the mask like 20 pixels of feathering. And then I'll animate it. I'll just keyframe its shape at the beginning. I'll keyframe its shape at the end. And I'll try to track, you know what, I'll do this. Maybe include her whole face. We just scrub through, look for major changes in position. Adjust the mask at those points. And the shot is not very long, so before you know it, we are done with Sonia. But while we're here, let's add another mask for my eyes. Bring a little bit of that greenish hazel color in. Oops. Same thing, 20 pixel feather. Let's keyframe the path at the end. And this one doesn't even require any animation really, because I'm just standing almost completely still. So there you go. Fixed. We can call this eyes. Call this inner mask. And we call this key. And now this is the perfect, most ideal version of this that you could have. We've got our actual edges perfected, our interior made perfectly opaque, and our eye color perfectly restored to the original. So we do have a whole bunch of layers here now, but when you're doing this kind of keying work, and if we're just doing an example shot with one shot, but if you're going to have a whole bunch of shots, you're going to have to keep things organized anyway. So once you've done all this matting process, you're going to take all of these layers and you're going to pre-compose them and just call this, foreground, because it's ready to go now. It's the foreground. And you're going to, it could help go in here and select your background. And so that you don't have to always turn it off and on in case you need to come back here and adjust things, you could just make it a guide layer so that when you've come in here, if you need to adjust your key or fix anything about this, it's going to be there. But when you're outside working with the finished shot, then it's transparent. So let's put in our background now. Where is our background? Background. And remember that we still have that issue of the edge to fix. If I want my subject to be like this, we're going to need to correct this. And of course, you're free to do that garbage mask now, which is going to work properly. It's going to adhere to the shape in here. But technically, think about it like you were working in an effects studio. Someone's going to do make sure that everything that should be transparent is transparent, and then another guy might be combining it with the background. So you don't want to have the mask out here, because I want to be able to pull this piece of footage and just have it go ready to go. So I'm going to go inside the key, the foreground, and I'm going to apply the mask to this, but I want to apply it to all of these layers. I want to affect all of them. So I'm going to, instead of, making a mask on each one and copying and pasting, I will create a solid above all of them. Make it comp size. And I'm going to apply the mask to that. And then I'm going to change its transfer mode to stencil alpha. So what it will do is cut through everything that is underneath it and work as a mask for all the layers simultaneously. So now we've got this taken care of, and the line is no longer here. So now we're completely done, and we can work with this. We can apply maybe some kind of color correction to this, some curves. I'm gonna turn into Andrew Kramer here and do our, increase the contrast a little bit, take the red down, take the green down, bring the blue up, so it looks like we're in space. And we can do some kind of animation of the position and scale. And the same for the background. And maybe apply a bit of blur to the background. And we're ready to preview our finished shot. So there you go. A few really tedious intricacies. I'm sorry if this one got a little bit boring, but I hope that it was informative for you, and you can use this in your future project for creating more space cats. See you next time. Thanks. Bye.